As events continue to unfold and the threads of mystery surrounding King Harald grow ever more tangled, all signs seem to point in one direction. His betrayal has become almost certain. However, the motive behind this betrayal remains unknown. Was he forced into it under pressure from the world government, possibly blackmailed or threatened with something he couldn't resist? Or did he choose the path of treachery of his own free will, driven by wild authoritarian ambitions reminiscent of rocks, who once sought to rule the world? Both scenarios are possible, yet I find it unlikely that Harald was so power-hungry as to sell out his own people. I lean more toward the idea that he was coerced, compelled to take this path under circumstances we still do not fully understand. What deepens the mystery even further is the fact that the Holy Knights know him well, and a magical sigil is affixed at the center of his castle. This indicates that his connection with the world government was not a fleeting incident, but rather a recurring and organized relationship. Perhaps those knights visited him regularly in Elbaf, or maybe he himself traveled to Mary Joaz through that very sigil. One circulating theory suggests that Harald was once a member of the Holy Knights himself. For this reason, after his death, they sought to recruit his son, Loki, as his successor within the Knights' ranks. Although this theory has a degree of logic to it, I personally find it weak. Joining the Holy Knights implies possession of the power of immortality, a power that would make it extremely difficult, if not impossible, for anyone in Elbaf to kill him. No giant possesses the strength to defeat such beings. Even his son Loki, the primary suspect in his murder, likely hasn't yet reached a level of power that would allow him to do so. If he had, Shanks would never have been able to capture him and bind him to the Tree of Adam. Moreover, if Harald had truly been a former Holy Knight, he wouldn't have been able to play with fire or deceive the world government. Being part of their order automatically places him under the mercy of Imu-sama, who could eliminate him at any moment. If she ever discovered he was trying to outwit them, his fate would be no different than Saturn's. Deception against such a force means certain doom. What is certain, however, is that King Harald was directly involved with the world government, and so the question remains, since there is a magical sigil in his castle that clearly links him to them, could it be that Harald once met Imu-sama in person and was marked with a symbol that allowed him to travel through the sigil's power? Was he entirely subjugated to her will, just like the Gorosei? Before we begin to wonder whether King Harald ever met Imu-sama, we must first take a step back and examine his ethnic background. Harald was not an ordinary king. He belonged to the ancient race of giants, a lineage historically known for its opposition to the world government's rule. Throughout history, there is no record of them ever submitting to its authority or pledging allegiance to it. This makes Harald's alleged cooperation with the world government all the more puzzling and suspicious. But if we ask a more precise question, did King Harald know that someone sits upon the empty throne? The answer might very well be yes, or at the very least close to the truth, especially when we consider that Elbaf, due to its location and rich history, likely holds many secrets of the ancient world. It may even be home to some of the forbidden fragments of truth buried by time and concealed behind walls of censorship and forgetfulness. It is entirely possible that Harald came across dangerous information related to the kingdom of Nerona, the kingdom to which Imu-sama is believed to belong, or even uncovered the names of the ancient kings who once allied with Imu in the war against Joy Boy. And if we take into account the long lifespans of the giants, it's plausible that Harald's father or grandfather fought alongside Joy Boy in that last great war. Perhaps he passed on all the details to Harald, the story of a mysterious opponent who wasn't just a human, but an immortal being that could not be killed. This would explain why Harald may have had enough knowledge to understand Imu's true identity and the secret behind her existence. For that reason, I would not dismiss the possibility that King Harald did in fact meet Imu-sama at some point in his life. The magical sigil in his castle is a symbol used only by those who have become part of her shadowy system, whether they be Gorosei, Holy Knights, or others marked by her mystical seal. Possession of that sigil binds its bearer to her domain, making them subject to her will, and Imu can dispose of them at any time she sees fit. Hence, the possibility that King Harald bore that mark is real. He may indeed have once been part of the Holy Knights, but that does not necessarily mean he betrayed his people out of greed or lust for power. It is far more likely that he consciously sacrificed himself, choosing to become a servant of the world government in order to protect his homeland from an impending war, a war in which Elbaf had no stake, no interest, and no gain. A sacrifice that others might not see clearly, but one that, in Harald's eyes, was the only way to shield his people from total annihilation. In either case, whether King Harald was a willing traitor or a victim of brutal coercion. His submission to the world government may have roots deeper than what appears on the surface. His story might bear a striking resemblance to that of Bartholomew Kuma, a man who was destroyed on a human level after being struck at his most vulnerable point. His daughter, Bonnie, faced with a cruel ultimatum, her death or his obedience, he chose submission to save her. Harald may have faced a similar choice. Perhaps he was threatened with the life of one of his children, or his wife, or even with the complete incineration of Elbaf itself. This threat feels all the more plausible when we recall how the author hinted more than once at Elbaf's fatal vulnerability to fire. On the other hand, if Harald truly betrayed his people by choice, then the most comparable precedent would be York, the woman who sold humanity's dream in exchange for meaningless personal luxury. But I find this explanation unlikely in Harald's case. It's difficult to believe that he would contact the Gorosei and hand over the keys to Elbaf out of sheer ambition, especially since he hails from a nation that values nothing more than honor and glory. If he was indeed under real threat, it's far more likely that he was secretly transported to Mary Joas, where he stood before the supreme authority, Imu-sama herself, the one whose name none dare speak. There he may have been branded with the magical sigil, which turns anyone who bears it into a complete servant of her will, and was forcibly conscripted into the ranks of the Holy Knights. But if his betrayal was premeditated, the story might have begun with covert communications between him and one of the Gorosei, a slow, cautious exchange that gradually evolved into trust, until one day he was summoned to Mary Joasi, where he met Imu-sama and received the sigil as a symbol of loyalty. In either scenario, victim or traitor, the thin line between sacrifice and treachery cannot be truly drawn until intentions are revealed. For now, all we have are the shadows left by the author, shadows that hint at a story much deeper than it appears, a story that transcends mere loyalty and betrayal and instead pierces into the heart of an even older struggle between races, peoples, and forgotten history. In the end, King Harald's fate remains shrouded in mystery, his truth suspended between betrayal and sacrifice, as we wait for the veil to be lifted and his true intentions brought to light.